Living Adaptive.
The goal is to adapt and thrive despite the adversity you face.
You're going to have that little voice inside of you trying to push yourself.
I set a vision for myself, and now I'm seeing it come to fruition.
I'm grateful for losing my leg.
There's just some things you must endure in life.
You might crash. You might fail.
You can find a purpose in your suffering.
I'm not special. I just decided that I'm not going to stop.
You do everything you possibly can.
We want to change the world.
I'm going to adapt to it and make it the way it works for me.
Take what it is from life that you want and enjoy it.
Yo, what's up, everyone? This is Scott Davidson, and just so you know, you can find out more about Living Adaptive and previous shows, context for guests, and a bunch of other good stuff at livingadaptive.com. Go there. All right, real quick. Randy Nantz is a Green Beret that was wounded in combat. He's an elite athlete, and much of the notice is given to his involvement in adventure sports, OCRs, other sports, and he's also one of the more well-known Adaptive Training Foundation grads. Randy and I have now been at a few events together, and this interview occurred before our latest event, the Para-Spartan World Championships. Anyways, I broke this episode into two parts. The first part is enlistment to Green Beret to wounded, and the second part is recovery to addiction and setbacks, and then to adapting and thriving. So let's cut in. All right, what's up, Randy Nantz? Last time we were around each other, we were also up at Snow Basin, and I said to people, you're like probably the manliest dude I've met in the last like 20 years. I don't know, or ever. But you were out there just kicking ass. You took on the whole super, which was like 9 point whatever miles. You helped push the chair. You're doing everything out there, and you are as powerful as it gets, man. So it was really cool to be around you. It was actually a really empowering experience for me.
Well, man, I appreciate that. Thank you, Scott. It was, I have to say that that was a hump. Man, it was a beautiful place, beautiful course, but that was definitely a tough one. And then to get that chair around, that whole thing was amazing. But even you went 2 days in a row, bro. That was pretty stout, man.
Thanks, man. It was tough, and I didn't help very much on the first day with the chair to watch you guys like shove that right up. I mean, it literally felt like you're shoving it up a mountain peak, and you were. And it went up to, I forget, like 8,300 or something like that feet elevation-wise. So it was pretty high up, and the switchbacks were pretty wild. So it was a pretty insane experience up there. But you're not... Well, you're not foreign to these experiences, man. This isn't something unknown to you. You've done difficult things your entire life. And one of the more notable ones, what you're most known for, is a veteran. You're a veteran, and you enlisted after 9/11, and we're going to jump into that. What made you enlist into the military?
A lot of people said I should have joined a long time. And it was I think my attitude and just kind of the way I am about certain things. My dad, raised in my dad's house, he was not in the military, although he did go to military school through high school. So that definitely left an impact. The biggest thing was when September 11th happened. I mean, it really, it's a day that woke me up for a lot of different reasons. But, I just knew this was the real deal. And I was in a place in my life where I still needed to do some growing up. I still wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself, and the job I was in just wasn't doing that. And I had some young kids, and I just felt like I felt the call to serve, and I felt like this is what I needed to do. It was going to be the best for me and the best for my family, and as it turned out, that's exactly what it was.
Is your whole life kind of patriotic like this, where you would be willing to jump in and serve and put your life on a line like this?
It really has. Now, earlier on, I had earlier in my life, I was making some bad decisions, but that may have hindered some of that. But I always had a patriotic heart and always that to serve. When Desert Storm came along, I just knew that wasn't going to be anything. And of course it wasn't. I didn't feel that same call like my country needs me for this one. But when the Twin Towers fell and September 11th happened, and we knew we were dealing with a different kind of enemy, and then now this was the enemy of the future. I knew this was the time for me to make a difference. This was the time for Randy to stand up, good, bad, or different. And believe me, I was just scared as anybody else to go sign up at that point because this isn't a time of peace. I I told the recruiter, I have no ambitions, and I know I'm not clouded and think, I'm joining up right now because as soon as I get out of basic training, I'm going over to Afghanistan. I'm going to be the one to get bin Laden. I knew that wasn't going to happen. I figured it would already be done by the time I got out of basic into where I was going anyway. As it turned out, it wasn't. But we had the country and the military and DOD had refocused where we were about to go. So I knew when I enlisted that there was an inherent danger that, you could end up dead. You don't really think of it that way, but I just knew that it was serious business. And I wasn't joining, just thinking this was something that was going to pay for college or anything like that. I knew that this was the real deal and we were going to work.
You actually achieved the rank of Green Beret. That had to have been insanely tough to get to that point.
Well, it really was. It was quite a journey. When I first walked in the recruit, now you can go in and you could sign up to be a Green Beret. It'd take you 3 years. There's certain qualifications. Not everybody can do it. You get through those, they sign you up, and literally in 3 years, you can go from walking on the street to having a Green Beret on and them putting you on an ODA and sending you somewhere because it's not the conventional side of the house. Whether people think we're at war or not, or if we actually are, doesn't matter. Your job doesn't change, and they're over there doing it right now. But I had to go in. I had to enlist in the infantry, and originally, I was some people. I don't know. There's a little friendly rivalry between Green Berets and Rangers, but the reality is, when I first went in, I wanted to be a Ranger. I wanted a Ranger contract. You couldn't sign up to be a Green Beret, but I literally went down September 27th. Doesn't seem like that's that many days after September 11th. But when I got into the Dallas Maps, it's a 4-story building, was packed, was standing room only, took me all day. By the time I get into the job counselor, the guy tells me, well, there's no airborne slots left. So that's a problem. I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm just, I'm like the average citizen here. I'm like, look, I just walked in to sign up. You're in the military. You're supposed to sign me up, give me a job. And then, the guy explained to me it is more like a corporation. The slot has to be coming open in that at this time or said speak, and there is a certain amount that they have, and there's not an infinite amount. So, but he said he had a deal for me, right? He said, I can sign you up, go in the infantry. There's an $18,000 signing bonus. I said, well, I like that. It's not that I was here for the money. That didn't really matter. That wasn't a consideration. But hey, if it's a bonus, it's a bonus. Mm-hmm. And he said, you have a family, so you don't want to go unassigned. He said, I have an opening that you can go out to by Savannah, Georgia. And he said, there's a Ranger battalion out there. And he's right. At Hunting Army Airfield. First Ranger Battalion is there. And I was going to be going to Fort Stewart in 3rd ID, mechanized infantry, which I didn't know this at that time. And so I'm all right, man, sign me up. Because he's like, you can go there, you can link up with those guys, the Rangers being, and they'll hook you up. And no, that's not how it happens. Those guys would have shot me if I showed up at their door with a broken TV screen on my shoulder trying to knock on the door to come visit the Rangers. They have to sign into Fort Stewart in and out, right, to go to Hunter Army Airfield. Mm-hmm. So if they get kicked out of Ranger Battalion, they get sent to 3rd ID, and they hate those guys. I mean, I don't blame them. Mechanized is a different world between Ranger Battalion and being in a mechanized infantry. It's a night and day difference. So that's how I really, I signed up for the infantry at that point. I went off to basic training, and next thing you know, I'm signing into Fort Stewart, Georgia on March 15th of 2003. I'm sorry, 2002. And, it was literally November 2002. We went to NTC, and we knew that we were going to be going to Iraq.
That deployment was serious biz because when you went out there, you were the first crew really paving the way in some of the regions that you went into.
That's exactly what we were.
That lands you into some pretty significant situations.
Combat I've heard been described as like sometimes it's hours, days of sheer boredom. Of boredom, and then moments of sheer fright. And that's kind of how it goes. It was a long haul for us because we did go to Kuwait. We sat in Kuwait for 3 months waiting to roll across the berm. We literally went to NTC in November, came back in December, and I think we were home for a couple of weeks, and literally, and luckily, got to spend Christmas, most of us, at home. Some of the advanced party did not. Mm-hmm. I think I deployed January 3rd of 2003 to Kuwait. And then we sat there and got through March 19th is when the bombing started. And literally that next morning is when we rolled across the berm. And I was in an infantry unit. It was 2-7 infantry. And we literally leapfrogged with 3-7 Cav the entire way to Saddam International Airport, of course, is what it was called then. It's now BIOP. But it's Baghdad International. Our first significant engagement was in the Samawa, and then we proceeded to hit, El Najaf was another area that we were in. And what was significant about this spot was we were now out in front of the supply lines, and literally they were like days behind us. We went 5 days without supplies. So we were starting to run out of fuel. We were running out of food and water. And we had to send, it was so dangerous, we had to send an element back to go get it. They weren't going to bring it up to us. And we did do that. I stayed with the element that stayed back, the main element, which stayed in El Najaf. And we lost 5 guys there. 6. That was where we experienced our first casualty. And I was pulling guard on the perimeter, not far from where it happened, literally less than 100 meters. I was sitting there and having to watch out in front of us. We were out in an open area, and we had a little onion farm to our left, and then out in front of us, probably 500 meters, a good ways, was a little village. And so we were watching both of these areas, and 2 tanks had pulled up and were like talking to each other, and they were facing different directions. And I look over and I see one of the guys off the tank, and I thought, I just thought to myself, I still remember this to this day. I thought to myself, that guy's off the tank. Because when you're in training back on Fort Stewart, and there's a lot of training for the infantry, you're always in the field. Mm-hmm. And then, you work on, those guys won't get off the tank. So if there's any help to be spread around, they won't get off the tank. So, it's kind of funny. And I just saw the guy there, and then I go back to looking out through the binoculars at the village, and all of a sudden I hear a gunshot, and I know it's an AK. It was only one, but you distinctively know what an AK sounds like at this point. And I look over and I see blood all over the side of the tank. And as it turns out, there was a little spider hole that wasn't very far from where the tanks parked. And what I mean by that, it was an opening, and it was actually a little tunnel that went back to where that little onion field was. And a couple of bad guys had crawled up out of that thing. And since it wasn't built up like a lot of positions were in Iraq, they were everywhere, you couldn't see it. It was just, when you looked across the landscape, which was more like desert, it was just flat. And so you really couldn't see this thing. And these guys crawled up out of it, and one of them crawled up within 15 meters of these tanks and stood up and shot this kid in the back of the head. And his name was PFC Sanders. I'll never forget to this day. I didn't know the kid, but that was our first casualty. And then we, the next day, and it made the news, was when the first VBID, or vehicle-borne IED, and was a taxi cab that the guy actually drove up to one of the checkpoints we had on the freeway and blew himself up, and it killed all 4 of the guys that we had that were up there pulling guard at that checkpoint. And, those are days I'll never forget. And literally, it was another day or two there, since we were there for 5 days. We had another Bradley, and I think it was like 2:00 in the morning, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, that was out doing some sort of routine patrol and around our perimeter or somewhere to that effect, and drove pretty close to a little house, and this thing was more like a clay hut. It really wasn't a house. We're talking about a dirt clay standing figure or standing structure, but it apparently had a huge well next to it, and the crew didn't exactly see it when they were coming through, and I'm certain they were tired. We all were by this point, and that Bradley fell the 50 or 60 feet down to the bottom of that thing. Luckily, it only injured most of the crew, but one of the guys there died. So that's where we lost 6 of our guys right there. And then another one that's a well-known documented case was Sergeant First Class Paul Smith. He was the guy that got the first Medal of Honor during Afghanistan and Iraq. That guy was attached to my battalion as the engineer company that was he was the platoon sergeant for the engineers. And they were less than a mile from us when they were engaged with those guys. And they were, between us was the aid station. I was in a blocking position there in the airport, and we were engaged ourselves. And then there was the medics between us. And then a little less than a mile away was where Sergeant First Class Paul Smith fell.
Your life has been marked with a lot of significant adversity, your adult life, that is, that I know stories of. And you didn't go unscathed either, and you deployed multiple times. And I recall hearing your experience of when everything changed for you physically, and some of your story too. How did you eventually end up a wounded warrior?
We did the deployment, the initial invasion. And once we came back, I, since I'd always still wanted, I knew, okay, I wasn't going to get to be a ranger at this point, because you can't just go, join the Army and the infantry and go do infantry and then just go over and knock on Ranger Battalion's door and ask them to join and come try out. That's not the way it works. Mm-hmm. So my best choice then, because I'd enlisted for 6 years right off the bat. And by the time we got back from our deployment, I'm not even sure I'd hit year 2 yet, or the end of year 2.
Wow.
So I had some time left. And I said to myself, went back to that old commercial, right? Be all you can be. So I wanted to make the most of my Army career. I knew I was going to get deployed again. And although I think that I was in 3rd ID during the best 3 weeks of his life since World War II, I didn't want to redeploy with those guys. I wanted to go because there were times during our engagements, and certainly as we came up through the airport and then into Baghdad, that it was Green Berets vehicles and those guys that were leading us in. And they had channeled these guys in, the bad guys in. So, we just did the cleanup. And I saw how professional those guys were. It didn't take a rocket scientist to look at those guys and see the equipment on and seeing what they were getting to do. And you know what I mean? And the position they were in, the authority they had, the leeway they had, the responsibility they had. And then take a look at me and my guys, who all us privates seemed like a bunch of ragtags, right? Compared to those dudes. And I'm like, so I just want to then, if I'm not going to be able to go to Ranger Battalion at this point, then this was my next best option. And, I'd always wanted to be a Green Beret when I was a kid. Everybody did in the 70s after John Wayne's movie. So, it just made sense to me. And I thought, well, man, this is maybe what I should have done to begin with. Then I went on to, once I went through the Q course, that took me 2 years. And once I became a Green Beret, they sent me to 5th Group. And then when I deployed with 5th Group back to Iraq, and, literally we had started off in Taji, which is northeast of Baghdad, but then they brought us back into the Dura House, which really wasn't too far away from where I had been the first time, although I was more on the other side of the green zone and in that sector over there when I was the first time. And we went out on so our conventional units, so in special operations, this is how it works. We're on an ODA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're collecting all this intelligence, right? And we're looking at all the other intelligence that's coming in from other places. And we formulate, and then we get to put together the targets of the bad guys that we want to go after in our neighborhood, mostly from high value targets down. And doing that, we learned several things. When we first got there, the conventional unit there had been there a while. So you don't own any battle space in special operations, right? Unless there's no conventional units there, like the beginning of Afghanistan. But once conventional units show up, that commander owns that battle space. So then me and my team would go in to, if we were going to put a hit, we were going to do a mission. Wherever that bad guy was, we would go to the commander that owned that battle space. And we would talk to that command team, and we would, basically ask permission to come in and do some work in his neighborhood with them. And so at this particular time in December, and it may have been late November of 2006, we were in the Dura house right outside the green zone, which was across the river from it. And the conventional units had swapped out. So the old units that were there when we came in, we would bring them the guy we were looking for, and they would say, or, the cell we were looking for generally is what it was. They would say, oh, yeah, we know who they are. We know exactly where they live. Let's go do this, right? And it made things much simpler. Plus, these guys had realized, you're not going to sneak in anywhere in Baghdad with 100 or 200 vehicles in the middle of the night, right? You're just not. Problem is then when the unit switched out, now those new commanders in there haven't learned those lessons. And we had lost a high-value target by 2 minutes just previously to this. And it was because the conventional unit, now was brand new. So they didn't know the bad people in their area yet. They didn't know where they lived. And the commander wanted to go blackout. And so we missed that high value target because, then we ended up getting drove around the block. They missed the turn. A couple of vehicles got stuck. You're trying to sneak in when you just can't do that anymore. And you had to really go in with white light and 60 miles an hour because all those Iraqi police checkpoints at this point were just really early warning systems for the bad guys. They're supposed to be on our side, but they weren't. And so that's why you didn't do that. And when we missed that high value target, we decided when we were going to go, we had a very serious one coming up. And it had 21 bad guys on this tip, right? Or on the plan that we had built. And this was a huge plan, huge package, and had all the intelligence. And we send it up and get it approved. But we now know we need to go out there 48 hours in advance to drive through quietly, just our team, after dark, and kind of go through and check out the neighborhood. One, so that we know that we have a good route in and a separate route out. Because at this point, we weren't the only ones putting up roadblocks, right? I mean, the bad guys were too. And some of which for us, but also between the Sunni and Shia neighborhoods to protect themselves. They also put up roadblocks. And so we went into a neighborhood in Baghdad, Jadida, that was very bad. It had been completely fenced in by the conventional forces because they had put out so many IEDs and so many EFPs. And the EFPs are the shape charges. Those are the one with the copper round. It focuses all the energy in one direction. And we don't have a vehicle that can stop it. Not one. Every one of our vehicles, even those big, large ones, even the tanks, guys have been killed in them and have been significantly injured like myself. So these things are very deadly, deadly weapons. And these guys have been putting out a bunch of them. And they weren't only just killing Americans, though. They were killing a bunch of Iraqis. They were very, very bad individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we went in this night, we went in with 3 vehicles, very quiet, very light signature, apparently not light enough. Or, they just already had the whole place wired up, as I'm sure is what the deal was. And literally, as we pull into the neighborhood, we radio back to the B team. We let them know we're in the neighborhood. Now we're going through. We will contact you as soon as we come out, or if anything happens. And so we pull in, and as soon as they acknowledge that, we go ahead and pull into the neighborhood. And literally less than 60 seconds, I was hit. And I was in the 3rd vehicle. It wasn't a very loud, to me, it wasn't extremely loud, but also we do have, at this point, I've got some very good hearing protection on. And it rocked the vehicle a little bit, but, there's not driving around here. So it could have been anything. I could have been rubble. It could have been a big hole we just drove through. I wasn't really sure, but I think more of it was because I was not unconscious, but, the force of it definitely had me confused, and I wasn't sure what happened. Literally, was sitting there, and I had a map in my hand, and I was looking to my left, and I could see a roadblock the bad guys had put up. It wasn't an American one. It wasn't a HESCO's. It wasn't any of the stuff, the cement walls that we put up. This was something they had done, and I knew we didn't know this. So I was writing on that map exactly. I was coloring in with my pen exactly where this roadblock was, so that we would know. And next thing I know, the map's gone, my pen's gone, the clear lens glasses I had on were gone. So as we went in, this thing hit, and I'll be honest with you, there was a moment that was slow motion because all this was going down. And now I can hear them in my ear, my team members calling off IED drill. So then I'm like, was that us? Was that me? Because, and then the next thing I know, I breathed in something horrible, and flames erupt everywhere. And I was still conscious through the whole thing. At that point, one of our medics named Matt opened the door and helps me get out of the vehicle, and then I start rolling, trying to put myself out. Problem is, you have all that equipment on. You can't do a nice, tight little roll. It's very hard to do that. And my equipment was 70 pounds. Once you put the plates on, our team SOP was, and not all teams were doing this. I know some that went out with 4 magazines, but we were knuckle draggers, and we were going to be in a gunfight. I'm not going to get killed because we ran out of ammo, unless it was a long, sustained one, right? Well, our team SOP was, you had 10 magazines on you and 1 in the gun, and that was for your long gun. That was for your primary. And you could carry as many as you wanted for your pistol, but you had to at least have 4. I think it were 6. So we carried a lot of ammo, and then I also had water. I had my radio equipment, and I'm not kidding, it weighed 70 pounds at the extra what I put on. And at that time, I was 239 pounds. I was a monster.
Were you diesel? Just a jack, dude?
God, I was jacked. I worked out 3 hours a day.
Damn.
I was working out with 375 for chest, and I would do 6, sometimes 10 to 12
God damn.
chest. No joke. I was a beast. And then when I put that 70 pounds on, that made me like 310 pounds. And so once I finally get put out, they tried to initiate an ambush. Luckily for us, 2 of the 50 cals were still working. Those things opened up. Those guys decided we weren't the ones that they wanted to mess with, and they stopped. And then they basically packaged me up, and we called back. It took us, now we can't get a hold of the B team to leave to let them know where we are in the position of the vehicle that we're leaving. Although it's fully involved, we also dropped 4 thermite grenades on it. Because of the radio equipment that's all classified in there, not just the radio equipment that the conventional side has, we have 2 or 3 other radio systems. And then the jammers that we had in our vehicles, the conventional side does not have either. And so there's some classified stuff. So all that has to be destroyed. And believe me, it was. And then we pulled, once we finally get a hold of them, we do pull out of there. And they got me to the cache probably within 45 minutes.
How bad did you know how bad you were at that point?
Well, I worked on an ambulance my first 7 years out of high school. So I kind of did. I was trying to tell myself maybe it's not as bad as I think. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But it had burned my hands, it burned my face. I had inhalation wounds. And the only thing I think that kept me, there, not like as in I was going to die, but I didn't freak out. I wasn't crying or screaming. It was because I was really pissed off. I knew I was injured significantly enough that I wasn't going to finish the mission. None of us were finishing the mission that night, and I knew that I was going to be leaving the team. I figured out. I mean, I knew I had to go to the medical. I hadn't really thought it all the way through that, man, I'm going to end up stateside. That hadn't occurred to me yet. I just remember as we were driving, the medic, we're all piled in the Humvee now, and we're like piled in. And he's next to me, and we're crumpled in there, and he's like, hey, man, I know we didn't really get to I know you're burned. He said, but we didn't really get to check you out. We didn't have time. He said, but do you feel any pain anywhere? Do you think you have any broken bones or any other injuries? And I'm like, and it literally like probably 10 minutes before, maybe not even 10 minutes before this, I looked down and I saw in the light that went by on a street light that my utility belt and my pouches that were on that utility belt were all melted and gone. And I was like, and something in the back of my head said, maybe you should check your butt. And I reach back and it's not there. It's all slick. And I pull my hand back and I'm like, oh shit. And so I just kind of sit there. And then he's like, when he asked me this, I say, yeah, man. He asked me, are you injured? Right. Any other? Cause we really didn't have time. And, I say, yeah, man, I think my ass is gone. And he's like, look, man, I'm serious. And I'm like, I'm serious. I'm like, look, dude, I'm serious, bro. I just reached back and I'm pretty sure my ass is gone. He goes, well, let me look. And so he's leaning over and he both hands grab, my pant seam, and I lean for him and I roll that way. So as he pulls, and I hear him just go, oh, and then he puts me back and he's like, man, you went through some shit back there, huh? I'm like, yep. And, we're going along and he says, he starts doing small talk. And since I was on an ambulance, now I was an EMT, not a paramedic. I wish I had went all the way through paramedic school, but I'm thankful for the time that I did have an ambulance. It taught me a lot, and I got to make an impact in some small areas. And so, I knew what he was trying to do, but I'm the type of person when I'm irritated, small talk is just going to irritate me more. And so he starts all that small talk, and I said, look, Matt, hey, man, I know what you're doing, and I know why you're doing it. So if anything changes, anything at all, if I feel funny, if I feel anything, I will tell you. You will be the first person, and I will make sure that you know. But right now, I'm really fucking pissed off, and I don't feel like talking. And I kind of laughed today thinking about it because it's dark and he's in front of me and all I can see is the silhouette of his helmet looking forward through the windshield, right?
Yeah.
And I can see it start to shake his head up and down like, yes. And he says, you know what? I'm going to take that from you right now. Thank you. Literally it wasn't 10 more minutes and we were at the cache.
And that began a whole new life for you. I mean,
oh man, I had no idea, really to that point. I knew I was injured, but all I knew was I was coming back. I was coming back. This wasn't going to be the end. I didn't just get this Green Beret for it to end like this.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the path you walked and how long it took to get there, it's almost like the Green Beret training also meant a lot more after it was done, after the actual war was over for you, where you went out there and went in your firefights and paved the way. When you got home, man, all that training, all of that mindset training, the physical training, everything really paid off, I think, to make you such a thriver. What does it take to be a Green Beret?
You have to have never quit. And I know you hear people say that all the time.
Sure.
You have to have a never quit attitude. And that means even when it really sucks. Because as you and I both know, most people mean they ain't going to quit when it ain't hard.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment it gets hard, people quit. And, that's one of the things in the Q course that along the way, there's many ways that the cadre can make sure you don't make it through when you don't need to. You can get peered out by your fellow peers, and that does happen. You can get hurt. There's any number of honor violations in all kinds of ways. But the fact of the matter is 85% of the people quit.
You're the 15%, man. When you came back, you had to be, you had to be something different than what you're used to.
Yep. The biggest thing it did for me is the quality of other soldiers, the guys I served with, that it now put me in the company of. And then the pride in the unit.
The validation. You knew you were badass, but this validated who you are.
Well, shoot, when you show up at group, buddy, you don't feel like a badass. You're like a brand new little baby.
Yeah.
It's been there forever. And, like my team sergeant, he's no longer with us. He was killed in Afghanistan.
Sorry.
Later. And he was the gunner. How he didn't get hit by any of this, none of us know. It was just a miracle. But, he survived that one to later go on to be shot and killed later in Afghanistan. So, but this guy was a badass. He'd been a Green Beret for over 10 years, and this was the guy you wanted to see when you got to group after leaving the Q course, being a student for 2 years, being around a bunch of guys that want to be Green Berets and all talk all this crap, but really don't know shit because they ain't been there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And you show up, I compare it to when you show up to group as a Green Beret. You should remember back in the day when everybody was doing karate and taekwondo.
Sure.
You always had that guy, there's plenty of those dudes that thought they knew something. They knew just enough to go get their ass kicked in a bar, and they did.
Yeah.
That's when you show up to group, that's where you are, because you don't, you have the skill set, you know what I mean? And you have the aptitude, and you have the mindset, and you have the leadership skills to be there. But you don't know shit from China. You don't know your job. You know what I mean? There's so much more to it than you can even imagine. And then again, there's no private. So the team does everything for itself. It does all the paperwork. It plans out all the training. It does all that. And everybody on the team has their part of doing it where, you're E5s, E6s, and E7s, where when you're in the conventional side of the house in the Army, all the E5s and E6s and E7s, even when I was in Kuwait spending days reloading and repacking all that stuff, they all stood around pointing and supervising. They don't actually get down and help and lift a finger to help. When you're a group, there is none of that. Those E5s, E6s, and E7s, you are the help. Everything that comes to your team, you're going to unload. You're going to put it where it needs to go. When you pack up, you're going to pack everything you have. Your team's going to do that. You're going to put in, like I said, you're going to put in the paper. Everything that you do all the things that you have to do for a unit to train and to go into combat and to do everything that a unit does, but you do it as a team. And then you submit all your paperwork up through the company, right? And then it goes all the way up the chain to get approval and comes back down, or, whatever needs to be changed or whatever. But by now, generally, what's expected on those documents and how each commander expects them to be. You know what I mean? When you send up all that kind of stuff to get them signed off on. So, it's all you do the work. You can't be lazy. You can't be somebody that you thought you were going to go in the Army and at some point not have to really work because you're going to have all your privates doing it. And there are people that do that. And there's, hey, it's the way that system works. And, I just say, when it comes to leadership, my view on that is, man, if you're not ready to lead from the front, then you need to get the hell out of the way.
All right, that concludes part 1. Part 2 is Randy Nantz discussing his recovery to addiction and setbacks and to adapting and then thriving. Tune in to hear his insights. Remember, go to livingadaptive.com to find previous episodes, show notes, contacts for guests like this guest, links to social media accounts, and a bunch of other good stuff. So go there. Peace.